Welcome everybody to Recapped with Established. I'm Rich Maloy, the VP of Engagement at Established and partner at Springtime Ventures. Excuse me. And each week we hold office hours for startups in the Startup of the Year network. Now, office hours are private, so the founders are comfortable sharing what's top of mind for them. But then we get together at the end of the week to talk about what's on founders' minds and share the advice that we offered to those startups with you, the viewer. Just a quick note, early applications for Startup of the Year 2021 are open. If you missed it, this week was our 8th annual Startup of the Year Summit. It was 100% virtual, 100% free. There were amazing talks from Tim Draper, from Mike Evans, the co-founder of Grubhub, from Kara Golden, the founder of Hintwater. Some really, the content was great. And this is coming from somebody that normally when I go to startup conferences, I never go to the talks. But this time I did. I went to all of them and they were awesome. So you can catch that on our YouTube channel for Established. So without further ado, thank you all for being here, and joining our Recapped today is Jeff Erickson, the Director of Business Development for Carta. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Rich. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Awesome to have you. So, we've collaborated across Colorado and Utah, across the Rockies startup community for a couple of years now. You've known Matt, I think, yeah, my founder at Springtime, or my partner at Springtime, even longer.
Right. Yeah, you guys have been great. In fact, you were one of the first VCs that I got to know there in the Colorado market.
Awesome. Nice. Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Good stuff. I was rocking my Colorado background just for you, just to have, represent the Rockies here today. So
I haven't been there for so long. It's been like 9 months when COVID hit. So
I hear you, man. I haven't
had a chance to get out there.
I know. Yeah. So, gosh, we hope all of that happens soon.
I agree. Yep, I'm with you.
Yeah. So let's talk about, what did you talk to startups? You did office hours with startups. You've done them through our monthly office hours program, but then also at Summit this week. So tell me, what were some of the things that you were talking to founders about this week?
Oh man, the event there, the Summit event was just incredible. Like you said, the speakers there were amazing. But yes, absolutely loved the office hours that I had. I spoke with several founders, and we had a chance to kind of share what they were working on. And it was interesting because there was a couple founders that were super early stage, yeah, and kind of at that first round of financing, figuring out whether they wanted to do a safe note or a convertible note or a price round. And then also spoke with a couple founders that were kind of a little bit further along, had raised a more significant amount of money. And so there were different conversations with each founder. But one of the common themes with the early stage founders seems to be, how do we make sure we're doing things right, right out of the gate, and how important is that? So that is something that I talk to a lot of founders about is the importance of doing things right and doing them right from the very beginning.
And you're talking specifically about, prepping for the fundraise. Can you give me some specifics on that?
Yeah, I think, if it's even before then. I think a lot of founders, they have their idea and they start getting some traction maybe, and they kind of skip over the formation part of the business and worry about it later. But I mean, I'm seeing even from the very formation to get things set up correctly. And I mean, it just makes things go so much smoother down the road, especially, as you get into the times where you're going to be raising capital, to have everything, lined up so that you're ready for the investors to start talking to you, as opposed to scrambling at the last minute going, oh, we got to do this and we've got to, maybe convert from a LLC or something. Just doing things right from the very beginning based on kind of your plans.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to having good, either experience as a founder where you learn it on your own, or having, counsel or somebody that has been there before to kind of direct you.
Yeah. Even before we talk about the counsel part, I'm totally tracking with you. One of the things when I talk to early founders, I feel like I've got like a spidey sense where I can sense when they don't have a founder agreement. And, I would say 3/4 of the time when I say, oh yeah, and you and your founders have a founder agreement in place. Like, well, yeah, we've talked about it. No. No. Let's talk about vesting and cliff, right? And 4-year vesting, 1-year cliff, standard. You can backdate it. It can be as simple as an email, right? But it's got to be documented, and it's better if it's a legal document. But I mean, I've heard some crazy stories of how startups have gone to the bottom of the sea because one founder left. There was no founder agreement, and they still thought that they had a third of it. And the VCs came in and said, well, get them to sign off on this fundraising round. And they're like, well, I've got a third of this company. No, you don't. This is how it, we should have done it. And I say, well, no, you give me a third of the company or, screw you. And
oh man, I mean, seriously, when you talk about setting things up right from the very beginning, that's one of the key things.
It's so critical.
Make sure you figure out, what the equity looks like, and to have that vesting in place. That's one of the key things that you have to do as a founder, especially if you've got multiple co-founders and you just see it way too often that somebody leaves after 6 months, and if you don't have vesting in place, it causes all kinds of problems.
One of those companies was a husband and wife with the husband's best friend, and the wife left the husband for the best friend, and they kicked the husband out of the business.
Oh man.
And
so as an investor, would you invest in that?
Nope. Absolutely.
I mean, you don't even have to know what the company does. It's like, nope, see ya.
Yep. I mean, on the Springtime team, it's funny, just a quick aside here, right? But on the Springtime team, our senior VC partners that have, were like Rick Patch and John Greff that founded Sequel Ventures that raised $400 million across 3 different funds in the 90s. I mean, they were big swingers in the 90s for big swinging VCs in the 90s for venture investment. And they are like, husband and wife, absolutely not. Period. End of story. Full stop. Right. But meanwhile, I work for a couplepreneur. Right. So Frank and Jen, co-founders, co-CEOs of Established, previously co-founders, co-CEOs of Tech.co, scaled Tech.co, sold off the media portion, kept the consulting and the startup stuff, right? Very successful couplepreneur, and they're great at it. And I have 3 sisters. One sister is a couplepreneur. She and her husband have a number of businesses together, both successful and not successful, and more successful than not. But they're a great couplepreneur, right? So it's so funny to have that dichotomy. But for Springtime, that was like, nope.
It's funny. You didn't know this, but my wife and we started a company, and so we were I guess I'd never heard the term, but a couplepreneur, and we had 4 other founders with us, and so I mean you can imagine the dynamics. The fortunate thing is we spent money, and it was a fair amount of money to get the company set up correctly right from the beginning. So I mean everything was laid out, and I'll tell you just from experience, we had issues come up where we had to go back to the operating agreement or the articles of incorporation and just read through it and say, no, this is what it says.
Yeah.
And thank goodness on every front, even when it didn't go our way, at least it was, documented and agreed upon, and there was no argument.
That's fantastic.
So,
I love that. I love that. That's fantastic. And that is definitely the next level from where I'm just telling founders, just, you know, for the love of your company, just come up with 4-year, just agree you're going to do 4-year vesting with 1-year cliff. But
yep,
so let's talk about that counsel piece, right? I mean, because lawyers are expensive and even
right.
startup lawyers are expensive. But you've got to work with a startup lawyer on startup stuff. So
That
I
is
mean,
rule number one.
yeah,
Seriously, that's the rule number one. I tell every founder is like, if you are working with an attorney that doesn't specifically do startups, and you are going down the path of kind of the venture capital, raising capital,
yep,
the first thing to do is get a good startup attorney.
yeah,
It will save you time, headaches, money. It will help you raise capital down the road. Well worth the investment. And I think a good startup attorney will also advise you on when things aren't in market, or aren't standard or whatever. Just
yeah,
because they do this day in, day out,
yep,
they
yep,
become a critical advisor.
yep,
So
absolutely.
I yeah, I see it way too often that you get a founder that wants to go to a brother-in-law because they passed the bar 3 years ago, and they're gonna give them a great deal
Yep,
or not charge them, and they end up spending a lot more cleaning stuff up down the road
yep.
than if they would have just gone with a good startup attorney from the beginning.
Been there as well with experience with one company on the Springtime portfolio that used a non-startup firm in the state where they were originally from, not Colorado, and it just with the final fundraise the last fundraise that they did, it was not final, but the last one that they did was it was a mess because they finally pulled in a startup law firm, and the law firm was like, what has been going on here? Like, how did you get these docs past your first 2 rounds of funding? And the last seed round was called like Series AA-2 or something like that, which so last question on the boring legal stuff, but super important, right? And then we could talk about some other stuff. But
Sure.
so, Jeff, what are the right things that startups should be going to lawyers for? Because you're not a lawyer, so I love your perspective on this,
Right.
right? And
Right.
and when is the right time? Because look, limited resources, limited capital, limited time. How do you know as a startup that you need to find a lawyer, and what are the things that lawyers should be doing for you?
Yeah, great question. I think again, the first thing is, even if you just have a good startup attorney look over your documents and make sure, before you sign stuff and get it out there, it's well worth, spending some money to have them review.
Yeah,
So from the very outset, the incorporation docs, setting things up properly so that you're set up. I would say from the very beginning,
yeah,
get
yeah,
get get at least a good startup attorney on your team. And a lot of times, as a startup attorney, a lot of them, if they deal with bootstrapping founders, they get your predicament,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they know that they can't charge you the Silicon Valley rates of a big law firm. Um, and so, I think that if they see potential in you as an entrepreneur, I think they'll work with you in terms of costs, realizing that's an issue. Um, at the same time, I mean, don't let the costs prevent you from, like, if you're going to do, even if it's a simple safe agreement, make sure you run things like that past your attorney,
yeah.
just so they're in the loop, if nothing else, and they can look over it and make sure you're not making some crazy mistakes.
Yep.
They see this stuff every single day. As a founder, you only see it a few times, maybe, in every company.
That's the truth.
So,
That's such a critical point. Is if you do this, build a company, sell it. Lucky enough to do that. Lucky enough to start another company. You're looking at, this is only the second time you're looking at incorporation docs, right? And
yeah,
it's and this
yeah,
lawyer is doing it every day. So
Exactly.
formation
And so
and
just the efficiency. I
yeah,
mean,
right.
in what they can accomplish in, in 1 hour,
Yeah.
is going to take you, a lot of a lot of time and heartburn. You probably still won't get it right.
Yep. 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 Totally. Awesome, man. All right. Well, let's shift gears to something more fun. Like I said, I'm repping my Rockies background here. You're sitting in the Silicon Slopes in Utah, in Salt
Yeah,
Lake
Salt
City.
Lake City.
Right on. Let's talk about this the startup scene in Utah. And first, I'm just going to start with an observation. What is going on with the pricing of rounds of Utah companies? When I see deals come from Utah, I have sticker shock. I'm always like, holy cow, is this coming from San Francisco or from Utah? Like I feel like the pricing is always like like 20% higher in Utah than it is in Colorado. And they're awesome companies, but I'm just curious about what's happening here.
That's fascinating. I've got two thoughts there, and I don't know that I'm right or not, but a couple things that I see just being in the ecosystem here. One, I think you have a history and kind of this culture of bootstrapping companies, and so a
Mm,
lot of
mm,
times the founders are pretty stingy with equity, um, and they hold on to it for a while,
yeah,
and they just try and bootstrap as gritty as they can, for the first little while, so they retain a lot of equity.
yeah,
And so when they do get to the point where they're going to raise funding, a lot of times they're in a better negotiating place because they don't have to have the funding. They know that they could go another 12 months of,
yeah,
just grinding,
yeah,
if they have to.
yeah,
And so it kind of puts them in an interesting spot in terms of negotiation, especially if they can get to cash flow where it's like, yeah, we need the growth capital to make this thing really go. But if we don't get it, we still have a viable business.
yeah.
Now, I mentioned this to you earlier. I think this can be a double-edged sword because sometimes you can get passed up. If you don't raise the money and you're not quick enough to grow, you may have a competitor that is really aggressive and they give up more of their company,
Yep.
but they pass you up because they're really growing. And so you're kind of fighting that mentality sometimes in Utah.
Hmm.
Not always, but I think that is why you sometimes might see, especially early stage, that the price is a little higher, is you might just have a different negotiating, position of power for the founders
Yeah.
in some way.
That's awesome. I
So
mean, those are great observations, and you're absolutely right. If you can bootstrap it for longer, you're in a better position, provided you're hitting your marks and you're hitting your milestones and you're continuing to grow, right? But that's then you're in a better position to go out and fundraise, and so then you have negotiating power instead of saying I've got an idea, I'm pre-revenue, I'll take 500,000 on a 2.5 million pre, right?
right.
So that's giving up a good chunk of your company, right?
Exactly.
But otherwise, if you're going to say, well, you know what, I've grown this to a point where I'll take 500,000 on a 6 million pre. That's a pretty big difference,
Yeah.
or even five or whatever.
But,
But yeah,
Rich, the other observation I'd make here is, you guys play in the early stage, financing rounds,
yeah,
and it's been interesting in Utah. You've seen, we started out with Kickstart Seed Fund, or Kickstart, and Peak Ventures, which is now Album.
oh,
They
I
used
didn't
to
know they
play in,
changed. I didn't know they
yeah, now it's
rebranded.
called Album.
Huh?
So,
Cool.
but you have those groups, and there's several others. Peterson plays in that space. So it's getting kind of crowded,
Hmm.
and so I think that also drives some of the valuations up when you have um, multiple investors that are trying to get into some of these deals.
Yeah, yeah,
And so anytime you can get multiple term sheets, it's going to increase the valuation in all likelihood.
yeah,
But I think you're seeing that happen more and more, as opposed to when I go to other ecosystems. I'll visit Phoenix, for example, and they just don't have the capital there.
right,
They're going to Salt Lake or
right.
Denver or Silicon Valley
Yep,
for funding.
yep.
And Salt Lake, I mean, you're seeing enough capital here that it's pretty widely available.
Yeah, that's
To the
interesting.
point where the Salt Lake VCs are now kind of going outside of Salt Lake, looking for deals in other ecosystems to kind of diversify.
Totally, totally. And I feel like that Colorado has a good balance right now between early stage capital and early stage startups, and I feel like there's an imbalance in the other direction in Austin. And look, you've got
Interesting.
you've got Mercury, and you've got Next Coast, and you've got Silverton, and you've got ATX, and or not ATX, but Sputnik, right? Our friends over there, right?
Yep.
But still, there's a ton of startups. So even though there's a bunch of great funds investing in Austin, in the greater Texas, if you will,
Yep.
but there's far more startups than there are funds out there. And so we've done a bunch of deals in Texas because there's just not the capital out there. And so we're getting access to great companies that are building amazing products. And it's not, and we're not getting broken over a term sheet, which
Yeah,
we have yet to turn down
exactly.
a deal based on a term sheet. But we've definitely looked at some really pricey Utah deals and been like,
That's awesome to get your perspective from outside of Utah and kind of see that. I know that you would talk to some founders, say, well, we're, feel free to make an intro to Rich and his team. We'd love to talk to them.
always welcome, always welcome. I have lots
Um,
of resources to help startups, startup of the year, and investing through established and investing through springtime. So
right.
tell me what else is going on in Silicon Slopes. What else is happening out there?
And the cool thing about Salt Lake over the last few years, you've seen some significant exits,
Yeah.
and I think
Yes.
that's what really started to set it apart. And we're kind of on this third wave
Hmm.
of companies. I mean, it almost started back in, 20 years ago, where you were talking WordPerfect, Novell, even longer than that,
Wow.
and people coming out of those companies seem to, you know, still be pretty new to the whole venture space
Yeah.
and how to build a company. And so you're still bringing in talent from outside of the state. And when a company would have an exit, then all that talent would go back
Yes.
home
Yes.
outside of the state, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of capital would go with them. But then you started to see there were a couple of companies that kind of came out of the Novell WordPerfect, where people started building them and they were Utah people. And when they exited, that money started to stay in Utah.
Yes.
And then they built another company.
Yes.
And the employees in those companies started to start their own companies. And then when they would have an exit, and you just saw this happen over the last 10 years or so,
Yep. Yep.
where it's built an ecosystem
Yep.
because the capital has remained in Utah and gotten reinvested,
Yep.
and the talent, more importantly, has remained in Utah, where now you have founders that have gone from a startup all the way through a significant exit now, where
Yep.
we've had Qualtrics, which was an $8 billion software deal, so last year or the year before.
Oh, that was a huge one. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, it's just enormous. And again, that was an example of a Utah founder who bootstrapped for a long period of time, and so they retained a ton of equity, even at the big exit. And you saw that happen not just in that case, but you had Pluralsight, Domo. Recently, I think they said we've had 5 or 6 unicorn exits this year in
Wow.
Utah,
Wow.
and that's not including the Utah Jazz, which Ryan Smith from Qualtrics acquired for $1.6 billion. But obviously related to the Qualtrics exit.
Tech
Um,
CEOs buying sports teams. It's a funny. It's like.
yeah, isn't that crazy? But I think the point is you've had these incredible exits, and that tends to be something that really catalyzes the whole ecosystem
Yeah.
somewhere. And
Yep.
so, and I see that happening in Denver
Yep.
and Boulder and the Colorado market as
For
well,
sure.
as you're starting to see some of those exits take place, and
Mm-hmm.
the capital is staying there and getting reinvested. And there's just a ton of activity there in Colorado as well.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. DataLogic's CEO, whose name escapes me right now, but he just we just saw his latest startup where he's not the, I think he might actually be in a CEO role, but he's in an active management role, but he's not he didn't, it was somebody else that he was investing in, this founder, and said, oh, actually, you know what, I really like what you're doing. I'm going to step in, and they had a great working relationship already. But that's just one example, right? And I'm, seeing people now starting to spin out of what's now Twilio, what was SendGrid, and we've seen plenty of that as
Yes.
well.
Oh yeah.
Even before that. So yeah, totally. That virtuous cycle of having the big exit, and bringing and staying in town and keeping that capital in town is something that is really drives, and it's a long-term thing, but it really does make a difference in the long run.
Oh, it totally does.
Yeah.
And you see that's what starts to differentiate the emerging, startup ecosystems, because you've not only got capital that gets reinvested, um, but you've got talent and mentoring that comes back in. So the example you just gave was, you have a CEO of a great company that's been through the whole process, and they come in an executive role at another emerging growth company, and they've already done it,
Yeah.
so
Yep.
they know
Yep.
how to take it to the next level.
Yep. Yep. Totally. Totally. And it makes it easier to back it as a venture fund, because
Oh,
now
for
you're like,
sure.
you've been through this before. It's going to be a little bit easier this time around. You know those you know uh, pitfalls to jump over.
Exactly. Yeah, and as an investor, I mean, it gives you a comfort level saying, okay, we're dealing with somebody that understands this whole process, from Series A to D and wherever.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's fascinating to see how these startup ecosystems really emerge.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see here. I think we could dive in on one more topic here today. Should we talked about term sheets a little bit? Should we talk about more about term sheets in that one company, or what else should?
Yeah, happy to. You had asked me a question before about if I've seen founders kind of go to an investor with a term sheet, and
Right.
I can't think of examples of that. I'm sure it happens, but it more typically the company might present what they would like in terms of their financing, and what, whether it's a cap or a valuation, and the terms, and then the investor would come back with a term sheet. You and I started talking about, why is that? Does it have to be that way? I mentioned to you a buddy of mine who was at a company called Omni, and they have recently teamed up with the National Venture Capital Association to create a standardized term sheet.
Yep.
And I love this concept, because I mean, they're pulling in data from thousands of term sheets and saying, okay, this is what's standard in the industry.
Yep.
Um, you know, you could go with 75.3% of the term sheets at this stage of the company have this clause in it, or whatever it is, but what's standard. And I think we could get to a point where founders could just go in and almost create their own term sheet,
Yep.
and say, hey, Mr. Investor, do you want to just take a look at this? Here's kind of what we were thinking. And I think more than anything, it opens it up as a negotiation, because the whole term sheet negotiation is really kind of a dance to make sure you guys are compatible.
Yes.
And it's not a win-lose thing. This is a fit, right? It's there shouldn't be a winner and loser in this dance.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so just to be kind of have open, here's kind of what we're thinking, and then get something back from the investor, say, this is kind of what we need, and then to see if and where there's a fit. I just think there could be a quicker way to get there if we had some standardization.
That's great. So I linked to that in the chat, right? So it's Omni, AUMNI.fund/term sheet. It's actually go.omni.fund/term sheet, but I linked to it in the chat. But I can't wait to read that. I'm definitely going to check that out, and read that, because I always talk to founders about how to better manage their fundraising process, right? And this was my talk during Summit a couple of
That's
days
right.
ago,
Yep.
and I don't have any great examples when a startup does not have a term sheet, except to keep circling and circling and circling and moving people closer and closer to the edge of the pool, as my pool party analogy goes.
Right.
But
Yep, which I love, by the way.
oh, awesome! Feel free to reuse it. Spread the word.
I will. I seriously will.
Yeah. So and that really is just like seed dynamics of seed fundraising. But anyway, it's great for founders to be empowered and to know, to have access to this information, to be able to then even just to go to, when you've got $500,000 of verbal commits, to just say, hey, you know what? Here's a standard term sheet. Let's go with this. This is what the NVCA says. This is what, where they all fall. Let's go with this. Go to an investor that you really like and pull a term sheet together with that investor.
Yeah. So Rich, I'll take it even a step further here. I read a blog post from Fred Wilson, USV, maybe 2 or 3 months ago. And he talked about how they would love to see an investor or a company come to them and say, we've got a Series A, let's do our Series A. Let's use some standard docs from this law firm or whatever, somebody that you can both agree that, it's going to be standard docs. And instead of even doing a note, a convertible note early on, we could make it as simple as saying, we'll use these standard docs. If you're good with them, we're good with them. And we'll just put the terms of the term sheet in these standard docs. And all of a sudden you've got a quick deal like that on a priced round that, you don't really have to have, I think sometimes you're saying there's 20 to 50 grand to get a Series A done.
Yeah.
Fred was saying in his blog post, he's like, there's no reason if we're comfortable with standard docs on our side and the founder's comfortable with standard docs, then let's put the info in there and let's get it done.
Get it done. Yeah.
And I see that a pathway to that, which is really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. And the more that those skids get greased, then the less time a founder has to spend fundraising, the more time a founder can spend building and growing their business, which is what it's all about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Oh, and you as an investor want that as well.
Yes.
I mean, you don't want them worrying about fundraising as soon as they close the deal with you. You want them building the business.
Yes.
That's what's best for everybody.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome, man. Well, last thing here, right? What is, if you could, what's the most, I think we've already covered what the most painful mistake is that you see investor or founders make. And that's not having good counsel, legal counsel for setting up stuff. What's the one thing that you've seen lately with a startup, or you saw lately with a startup that was pleasantly surprising, and you thought, wow, that's great. I'm going to talk to other startups about that.
Something that they did or they learned in the process?
Something that they did or they learned, yeah, something that pleasantly surprised you.
Okay, I'm on the advisory board for a startup that we went through the whole product market fit. The very early stage of product market fit. And it's been cool because these founders, they know that if, that's the key thing, they're willing to walk away if they don't have true market, product market fit.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think that as a founder, I would advise that, you find product market fit and be pretty open with yourself if you don't have it yet.
Yeah.
Because you either tweak something or you pivot or maybe even scrap it. Because if you're not going to have product market fit, don't go down the path and spend the next, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and who knows how much money trying to make something work that isn't, that doesn't have the product market fit. So I would say what I've learned is to emphasize early on finding that product market fit, measuring, testing, and going through that whole process. What I've seen with this particular group is that it's because they've done this drill and they did it in a standardized way through this program called Venture Validator. And, where it gives you actually a product market fit score. And really cool.
Yeah.
And
look that up right now.
So just because they did that, investors, it goes over really well with investors because they're like, okay, these guys have actually they know what product market fit is, and they've measured it and they've taken it seriously. And I don't know what this product market fit score means necessarily, but I know that that's something they're thinking about.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm going into some of these pitches and I'm not sure if a founder knows whether or not they have product market fit, I mean, that's probably my first big red flag.
Totally. Very cool.
So that's something I've seen just firsthand, just recently.
Yeah. I love that the founders also have that conviction to say, if we can't find product market fit, then we don't have anything. We need to walk away.
Seriously. I mean, it takes the founder being aware enough of, I mean, sometimes we get too caught up in, if I love this so much that everybody's going to love it. But to test that out and making sure that the data supports what you're going to be investing in, because if you can't establish that you have a market for what you're doing other than yourself, it's not worth your time and investment, and it won't be worth the time and investment of future investors either.
Totally. Well said, sir. Well said. Good. Well, this has been awesome, Jeff. It's first, it's always great to see you, and always great to just talk startup with you. I love it. A lot of fun today. I do
too. I could talk to you like all day, Rich.
Feeling is mutual for sure. Yeah, this is great, and a lot of great valuable insight for startups. So thank you for all that you do for startups and for the startup community at large. We're grateful for that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This has been awesome.
Yeah. Excellent. And to everybody that's watching, thank you everybody for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, Startup of the Year early applications are open for 2021. I'm going to drop that link in here. And so if you want access to mentors like Jeff, fill out an application for Startup of the Year. If you're an alumni, including this year, we're going to start including alumni and as well as the future applicants in our monthly office hour sessions. Once again, thank you everybody, and there will be no live stream next week because it's Thanksgiving. So have a wonderful, safe, isolated, hopefully Turkey Day, and happy Thanksgiving. All right.